honorable authorities and organizers. A very good morning and thank you for giving me a chance to speak on this wonderful occasion. The topic given to me is biodiversity and food security during pandemic. Please allow me to start. The disturbing videos and images of the poor people who migrated from one place to another, one state to another on foot in the months of April, May 2020 during COVID-19 pandemic would remain in our memory forever. Small kids, old people, pregnant ladies, all of them walked thousands of kilometers to reach their respective homes, respective states. A few died on the way. What compelled them to take such a drastic step? When media interviewed a few of these people, the common answer was loss of employment, leading to food insecurity. COVID-19 comes at a time when underlying climate change impacts are already compromising food and water security. Southeast Asia, which supplies 50% of the world's rice exports, is experiencing its worst drought in 40 years. I'm sorry for the negative vibes at the beginning of this video, but then let's deal with the facts. After all, man is responsible for the loss of around 1 million plants and animals species on Earth, loss of biodiversity. Food security is at risk because humans are reducing biodiversity, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. It calls for coordinated international action in a recently published report. Biodiversity is the variety of life at genetic, species, and ecosystem levels. Biodiversity for food and agriculture, that is BFA, is in turn the subset of biodiversity that contributes in one way or another to agriculture and food production. It includes the domesticated plants, animals, raised crops, livestock, forest, aquaculture systems, harvested forest, and aquatic species, the wild relatives of domesticated species, other wild species harvested for food and other products, and what is known as associated biodiversity, the vast range of organisms that live in and around food and agricultural production systems, sustaining them and contributing to their output. In recent times, global loss of biodiversity is threatening the security of the world's food supplies and the livelihoods of millions of people, according to a new report by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, which is also known as FAO. Biodiversity is critical for safeguarding global food security, underpinning healthy and nutritious diets, improving rural livelihoods, and enhancing the resilience of people and communities. This is the statement of FAO's Director General Jose Graziano da Silva, who said this in an interview. Less biodiversity means that plants and animals are more vulnerable to pests and diseases. Compounded by our reliance on fewer and fewer species to feed ourselves, the increasing loss of biodiversity for food and biodiversity loss for food and agriculture puts food security and nutrition at risk. The report examined biodiversity loss in 91 countries, including the plants, animals, and microorganisms that provide critical ecosystem services such as keeping soils fertile, pollinating crops, cleaning water, fighting pests and diseases. The study found that while more than 6,000 plant species have been cultivated for food, just 9 account for 66% of total crop production, indicating widespread monoculture on farmers' fields. The FAO tallied 7,745 local breeds of livestock, 26% of which are at risk of extinction, and 67% whose risk status is unknown. An estimated 24% of wild food species are decreasing in abundance, while the status of another 61% are not reported or known. The United Nations World Food Programme has identified 26 countries that are more at risk from increased food insecurity because of the COVID-19 crisis, with Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Mozambique among the most vulnerable in Africa. You must have heard about M.S. Swaminathan, right? In one of his commentaries, this eminent agricultural scientist draws on some of his early research on potato, focusing on the spread of pests and diseases, to highlight a few lessons for the future of food and agriculture in the context of COVID-19. He explains how India can be prepared for the spread of diseases, including viruses, in Indian agriculture while ensuring food security of the farming community and rural people. He had witnessed damage to the potato crop by a disease called late blight, caused by Phytophthora infestans in the Nilgiri Hills. Potato was a very important crop here, and its destruction led to considerable distress for the local people, as this coincided with the World War II, when rice too was in short supply due to lack of imports from Myanmar, the then Burma. Potato was at that time under-researched in India, perhaps because of its geographical concentration in the hills of southern India and eastern Himalayas. During World War II, potato became the major food crop in Europe, leading to the abandonment of traditional crop rotations and subsequently to the problem of resistance to the golden nematode in the colder lands. Potato is prone to a range of viruses, bacteria, and fungi infections. Swaminathan's further work relied on interspecific hybridization, a technique that came to be increasingly used after the Irish potato famine of the 1840s. When he studied the question of why the Irish experienced such a serious epidemic past, the late blight, he found the main reason to be the cultivation of a single variety. With no genetic variability, the potato became vulnerable to the rapid spread of disease. Fortunately, in Cambridge, there was a large collection of tuber-bearing potato solanum species from Latin America, which provided valuable genes for developing lines of resistance to several serious stresses and diseases. That again highlights the role of biodiversity in food security. Agricultural genetic diversity reduces vulnerability to infections. The importance of genetic diversity and biodiversity cannot be emphasized enough in the context of food security. During the Bavarian War of Succession in the late 18th century, there was a period called Kartoffelkrieg, or the Potato War. The potato crop was damaged by blight, and as the two armies had nothing to eat, while there were only minor skirmishes, thousands of soldiers died of starvation and disease. In Europe, these two emphasized the need for varietal diversity of potato, the main staple food. A single genetic strain like the present COVID-19 pandemic can lead to severe distress in the absence of resistant strains. Many key components of biodiversity for food and agriculture at genetic species and ecosystem levels are in decline. Evidence suggests that the proportion of livestock breeds at risk of extinction is increasing, and that for some crops and in some areas, plant diversity in farmers' fields is decreasing and threats to diversity are increasing. Nearly a third of fish stocks are overfished, and a third of freshwater fish species assessed are considered threatened. Countries report that many species that contribute to vital ecosystem services, including pollinators, natural enemies of pests, soil organisms, and wild food species, are in decline as a consequence of the destruction and degradation of habitats, overexploitation, pollution, and other threats. Knowledge of associated biodiversity, in particular microorganisms and invertebrates, and of its roles in the supply of ecosystem services needs to be improved. And then finally, during the Irish potato famine, people did not know what had happened. There was no information available till after the event. In India today, we have the advantage of excellent information and communication technology, which needs to be put to full use to reach the unreached with appropriate and timely information. There are several small initiatives towards this end. While the government machinery is providing good information on dealing with COVID-19, at the same time, we need to help our farmers and small producers deal with the threat of pest and disease in the farming systems too. Strong agricultural genetic diversity can strengthen food security and in turn reduce vulnerability to infections such as the current pandemic. To conserve biodiversity, which in turn would give us a much needed food security, let's focus on sustainable use and conservation of the ecosystems, species and genetic diversity that compose it. For this to happen, knowledge of the roles of biodiversity in the ecological processes that underpin food and agricultural production needs to be strengthened and used to develop management strategies that protect, restore, and enhance these processes across a range of scales. Consideration also needs to be given to how the international community can more effectively promote synergies in the management of all components of biodiversity across these sectors and others, in the interest of a more sustainable food and agriculture. Nature is in crisis, threatened by biodiversity and habitat loss, global heating, and toxic pollution. Failure to act is failing humanity. Addressing the current coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic and protecting ourselves against future global threats requires sound management of hazardous medical and chemical waste, strong global stewardship of nature and biodiversity, and a clear commitment to building back better, creating green jobs, and facilitating the transition to carbon-neutral economies. Humanity depends on action now for a resilient and sustainable future. Let's work on it. Thank you.